My name is Jim Osborn. I volunteer with Pickaway County Parks, and we're here this morning to do a virtual tree hike at Canal Park. Before we actually get into looking at the trees, let's talk a little bit about the surrounding land and why the trees that are here are here. In order to understand an area, we have to go back a couple hundred years ago to the time of the first original land surveys in Ohio. Studying those land surveys revealed the original characteristics of the forests in this area. Let's talk a little bit about what this area is. In research produced by Robert Gordon, which he mapped using lots of different sources and different people from different areas that focused on the 1799 to 1800 land surveys of Ohio prior to settlement, he was able to map the original forest cover of Ohio. Before we actually get into the colors and stripes on this map, of which this area is of particular significance to us, let's talk about the state of Ohio as a whole. This is a map produced by the Department of Geology. Now, why would we link geology with forest covers? Well, Jane Forsyth was a geologist with Ohio State University several years ago, and she did some pioneering groundwork on actually putting that together. So to start with, let's take a look at this area right in here, which is where we're at. It is part of what we call the Glacial Till Plains or Columbus Lowland area. Now what that means is that we have extremely flat land and it's covered by glacial till. Why is that important? Because a tree that we might find here may not be found there. Think when you visit the Hocking Hills on the weekends. You see the hemlocks, you see the scarlet oaks on the ridges. Those probably will not be found along the Scioto River. So let's go back now to the Scioto River. Mr. Gordon, or Dr. Gordon, was able to plot this purple area right down through almost the center of Pickaway County, which is, we are standing in that now. Looking at the color code, that tells us that is an elm ash swamp forest. So let's talk a little bit about what happened. So original forest communities are built on the topography of the land and the soils. Why Hocking Hills is different than Pickaway County. That is the shape of the land and the underlying bedrock imparting soil characteristics such as how acidic it is or how alkaline it is. Now, since settlement, we've also have to look at land use characteristics. What happened here? Was it left alone? Was it farmed? Was cities built on it? Were areas settled? And then people left. And when people leave, we enter a new realm of behavior in the natural world by plants we call succession. The succession starts with a blank piece of ground, very similar to a field that you decide not to plant that year. So what will grow there and at what stages? For instance, originally you'll see maybe small weeds for the first few years, evolving into a goldenrod field. Then you'll begin to encounter brambles and briars. And what would have been here originally would have been dogwood, sassafras, black locust, ash leaf maples, sometimes also known as box elders, would have been coming. Eventually, the trees that made up the original community would show up. Well, today things are all different. We've had several major cataclysmic events in the natural world. Excuse me. Some of you might have remembered that at one time we had the chestnut trees. Well, the chestnuts really weren't part of this area. They were more of a Hocking Hills, unglaciated plateau thing. But here, we did have huge stands of white elms. Then the Dutch elm disease came along. And then more recently is the loss of the ash. If we just walk a mile or so slightly southwest from where we're standing, we can see that in stark detail, Calamus Swamp. All the green ash standing in the swamp dead. So imports of diseases has changed what the forest will be when it comes back to some degree. Next is invasions by other shrubs. A big problem in our area that's going to limit how the forest goes through succession from, again, that bare piece of ground is influenced by things now such as bush honeysuckle. So today, as we look at this forest, consider, I will help you consider why we find what is here now as a result of what was here originally, based on the topography of the ground, how succession and land use has changed that, and the impact of non-native species and diseases. Okay, we're going to start with a signature tree in this type of habitat. The sycamore and these two standing right here, one there, are very large trees. In fact, historically, there's been some very interesting stories written about large sycamore trees during the early settlement of Ohio, especially the extremely large hollow sycamore trees. The sycamore tree kind of signs a habitat along rivers and creek banks. Now, earlier I talked about the different physiographic regions of Ohio, but even within the broad physiographic regions, we can have different habitats. We can have a swamp, we can have a floodplain, we can have the river banks. And all will contain different types of species. The sycamore kind of likes to be near water, but really doesn't want its feet extremely wet. So that's why you see it on this bank next to the canal. Over that area, or actually two more right over that way, growing in the exact same spot. Now, some interesting characteristics about the sycamore tree, which belongs to its own family, the plane tree family, is to start with, we have alternate leaves. Now, what does alternate leaves mean? Well, this tree was bitten by the last recent cold spell we had, so some of the leaves are dust. I think I can point out that here we have a leaf bud with leaf bud, and we go a little bit farther, we have another leaf bud, then we have a couple more. Now, you'll notice that they are on one side of the limb or the other, but there's no one directly opposite that. Later, when we get into buckeyes or maples, we can show you the difference, but we call this an alternate leaf arrangement. The other thing the sycamore has is one leaf, and these leaves aren't very large yet, off a single petiole attaching it to the stem. Now, the petiole is the little stem that attaches the leaf to the woody stem. So we call this a simple leaf. So far with the sycamore, we can say it has alternate simple leaves. Now, as this leaf grows and takes its final form, and I was kind of looking around the ground here to see if we had one from last year, it will become lobed and toothed. It'll have actually a hand shape about it. We call that sort of a pomade-shaped leaf. So, and you can see a little bit as that goes. So the key points to remember here is alternate, simple leaves that are going to be lobed or fan-shaped. Now, the sycamore, most of you may know that in the fall you can see these rather large brown balls hanging on the sycamore. Well, before they become that, it actually has separate male and female flowers on the same tree. And right here, I've tried to find a small male flower. Now, these were killed in the frost and compared to a female flower. I cannot be 100% sure because the cold spell seems to have killed these out, but these would have been the flowers right here. The female flowers would have been slightly larger, up to a ½ inch. The male flowers around the 1/4 inch. So I suspect both these may be male flowers. So the sycamore tree, you'll find it along the rivers and creek banks here in Pickaway County. Okay, as we're walking along, we're approaching with the canal on our left and the fields with the river over on our right. We're approaching the intersection of the path and trail. We come to a large hackberry with its limb close enough to the ground that we can take a look at the leaves and be able to talk a little bit about this tree. Now the first question is, why are the limbs here so close to the trail when hackberries back that way that we passed have the limbs way up on a tree? Well, you've got to remember that the leaves for these trees are like solar panels, and they provide the energy. So a tree that is in the open, that's not surrounded by any other trees, will exhibit a different growth habit. In other words, it doesn't need to compete for sunshine. So instead of going straight up, as the hackberries back that way did, this hackberry has found out it can be a little shorter and more rounded, putting limbs out in more directions. It can simply sit here and bask in the sun without worrying about any of its neighbors stealing the light from it. So this tree is in the elm family. In fact, it used to be considered in the genus Ulmus, which is elms. Now it's in its own genus. Celtis occidentalis is the Latin name for this tree. And starting with the leaves, this one's leafed out fairly well and fairly early, we see that it shows alternate, and again, as we discussed on the sycamore, leaf here, they're not across from each other. Simple leaves, there's only one leaf per petiole, and these leaves are toothed. Now the hackberry grows in very similar areas to the sycamore. It likes more soil. It really doesn't want its feet wet all the time, but can tolerate some wet spells. So that's why it is very, very common here. It, along with the silver maple, may be the most common trees here at Canal Park. One of the things that this tree does is produce a fruit from flowers in the spring. It has separate male and female flowers. They're staminate catkins, which means the male flower, and unfortunately it's already done, hangs down just a little bit, whereas the female flowers are usually clustered near the tips of new growth. And this is new growth here. You can see the brown twigs joined by the green twigs. And looking this low on the tree, I really don't see any signs of female flowers. And why would the tree do that and not take advantage? Well, this tree likes cottonwoods and oaks are wind pollinated. It really doesn't require insects to move the pollen around. Now we're going to look at a couple of trees today that are insect pollinated, and of which, by the way, you can't blame your allergies on. But in this hackberry, it's wind pollinated, so it makes more sense to put all your flowers up where the wind can catch and move the pollen. And they result in little single-sided drupes which mature in the fall. We have found a few that are still hanging on the trees. So the hackberry is really important for birds along these waterways, because when we think about what's happening right now, spring migration going north, well, later in the year we're going to have fall migration going south, and for a lot of these birds, those fruits will be waiting for. Okay, another interesting thing about the hackberry, which does have somewhat elm-like leaves, by the way, which was probably why early botanists put it in the elm family. They're thin, they're papery thin, but you'll notice that several of these leaves already have holes in them, which means insects are already at work putting those holes in the leaves. Early in the year, a tree has to make a decision in the spring. It has been without its energy source, the leaves, the solar panels, all through the winter. But prior to that, the good tree stored nutrients within the trunk and down in the roots in the form of starches. So when in the spring, when the water begins to come back up to the tree and the tree is putting out leaves, it wants to get as many solar panels out as fast as it can to get more energy. Then at some point, it needs to start building defensive compounds for all the little moth and butterfly caterpillars that are going to start chewing on it. So at this point, these leaves are still tender. So over the years, the moths and butterflies and other insects have timed their egg laying and hatching to come out when the leaves are at their most tender. Conversely, when we look at the migrating vireos, warblers, and thrushes we have going through now, they time their migration to when these caterpillars are all over the leaves. So while bird watching here at Canal Park, and we've found a fantastic number of species here this spring, it's been really great, I have found a lot of them in the hackberry tree. And I'm only suspecting, only because of watching through glasses and watching a little tiny warbler, where it be a bay-breasted or black pole, smashing it looks to be like an almost 1-inch caterpillar around. It has to be probably from the hackberry emperor or other numerous butterflies that enjoy this tree.